If you're a fan of Gundam, you're probably all too familiar with one-year war spin-offs, stories covering the war between the Principality of Zeon and Earth Federation, and by extension, the events of the original Gundam anime. For the most part, these spin-offs, whether good or less good, do a decent job recapturing the soul that made Tomino's world connect to so many of us. Writing that humanizes both sides of the conflict, characters that feel like more than archetypes, and a realistic progression of technology that you can follow if you're paying attention. None of that applies to the manga I'm talking about today though, which honestly feels like a parody at times. I'm talking about Mobile Suit Gundam Red Giant 03rd MS Team, which obviously takes its name from the famous 08th MS Team. It just started releasing in Gundam Ace magazine in Japan last year to promote the high-grade Gunpla set with the same name. And look, I know I've been hyperbolic in the past, pearl clutching, some would even say, but I think you'll agree with my opinion that this is just really silly after I tell you some of the story we've gotten thus far. So the thing about Red Giant is it takes place towards the end of the war. At this time, Amuro Ray and Char Aznable are both in space. We're dealing with the Federation and Zeon forces left behind on Earth to wrap things up. Following the Battle of Jaburo, Zeon is on the back foot. They're currently in the middle of retreating in two different directions out of South America. Most of the forces are heading back to California, but we're focusing on the detachment that went further south. Our first scene opens with a startled squad of Zakus, scanning the forest for any threats, when they're ambushed by a red RGM custom. It uses its arm-mounted weapon to blow off one Zaku's arm, which proceeds to charge back at it, but then gets intercepted by another RGM. Next, the squad's leader shows himself and destroys the final enemy with a Gatling gun, and he's piloting a modified ground Gundam from 08th MS Team. The remaining Zeon forces surrender, and we start to meet the pilots of this mysterious Federation squad. Our first lieutenant piloting the Gundam, his name is Ralph Zabka. We come to discover that he's a responsible guy and he usually keeps a composed demeanor. But when he gets drunk, he turns into a raging berserker that attacks anyone around him. Like this panel straight up looks like he's Broly, and this earns him the nickname Blazing Tiger. Next up we have Sergeant William Macchio, who pilots one of the RGMs. The only really notable thing about him is that he was born on Side 3, but he actually left there really early on, like he was only there as a child. But regardless, after the colony drop, his fellow Federation soldiers scrutinize him for being responsible for their comrades' deaths. He's not actually responsible, but they're just being space racist. Anyway, if you didn't notice, these two people's names are literally a reference to the two main stars of the first Karate Kid movie, William Zabka, the GOAT, and Ralph Macchio, just with their first names swapped. Weirdly enough, neither of those guys are the stars of the show. The real best character, and probably the main character in the manga, is the other RGM pilot, Sergeant Major Merriby Brandon. Her whole deal is that she's basically a mecha otaku. Like, she gets really excited about mobile suits and is a very eccentric person. So much so that she proudly tells the Zeon prisoners of war the name that she's bestowed upon her squad. Their name is the Three Red Giants, which is derived from Zeon's aces. They picked Red after Char, Giant after Ramba Ral and his name the Blue Giant, and Tri after the Black Tri-Stars. Every Zeon soldier that knows about them is like at a loss as why Merriby would choose a name about Zeon soldiers for her Federation squad, and they're like, oh, is it like a symbol or are they trying to like embarrass us? But really, she just thinks they're cool. She's not a very logical person. Like in another chapter, she's like dreaming of having a fight with Char because she just thinks he's so cool, but his face is censored in the dream because she's never seen him. Anyway, it turns out the Red Giant squad is working with a civilian subcontractor group to work on their mobile suits, run by this girl Barun, or Bayrun, CEO of Born Industries. And what this basically means is that they have more freedom to customize their suits as they please. And Merriby made sure to take full advantage of that with all the fancy changes that she made to their mobile suits. She just kept harassing Bayrun until she folded and implemented those changes. In reality though, it's just like an excuse to have these non-standard suits in the story to sell merch. Anyway, if you couldn't tell, the character writing in this is a lot more loose and like anime feeling than Gundam typically tries to be. Merriby as a mecha otaku and Ralph as a raging drunk are already silly enough, but their squad of mechanics too are like all midget old men with like Master Roshi type personalities. And then like one of the later introduced antagonists is very quirky. Like this guy has an eye that can like zoom in on things from super far away because he thinks he's from Baki. And he can like ultra instinct dodge bullets while JoJo posing. He glides around with strings attached to bats. The difference in vibe in this is clearly intentional. It's something that you're going to have to get over if you want to read this, but for the most part, it really helps the comic to stand out a lot, especially in the current sea we have of one-year war content that takes itself super seriously. Honestly, I think Merriby especially is just a really fun main character, and maybe I'd recommend the comic if it was just that, but it does go too far in one way, in my opinion, which we'll get to in a second. At the same time as the Red Giant Squad, we get a parallel look into the Zeon Squad they're pursuing, but mostly just two characters. Karai, or Kare, it depends on how you translate it, is the main dude. He's got a more toned-back disposition, and he's also in love with this girl, Seraphi Shin. And the main reason I introduce these two is what happens next. When this chapter starts, they're prepared to head off towards a Zeon base, so that they can join their allies in space. And Karai is reading Starship Troopers, the novel, which is really funny to see for me. I guess this means that the 1950s happened in Gundam. As the Zeon Squad gets up to their business in high spirits, a group of people in hoods approach, while singing. The guards point their guns at them to reveal themselves, and they turn around. They're dog people? Okay, not actually. That was just her dog in her cloak. But what they actually are is maybe even dumber. No, this is a group of ninjas called the Azdaha. They're named after a dragon from Iranian mythology. Even though they're in South America in this story, with pure martial arts skill, they take out the Zeon Squad, kidnap Seraphi, and even defeat Merriby in a fight. They're the real villains of the comic, not Zeon. Zeon are like not a big deal at all in this. And after this point in the story, both Karai and the Red Giant team are both trying to take the Azdaha down. This group is just really weird, and this is the thing I was talking about earlier that just takes this too far for me. This girl with the fat ass they keep zooming in on has a really absurd name, for example. Her name is literally Kill, like the word kill. And this other guy's name is Baby. It just feels like the focus of the storyline is something so far removed from Gundam that you might as well just be reading an entirely different comic. And unlike something like Despair Memory Gundam sequel or like Werewolf, this is trying to take place very adjacent to a lot of other storylines we know about. But for now, let's just treat it as a self-contained thing, because I know a lot of people don't consider the manga canon important. The Azdaha are portrayed as super capable and also sympathetic, weirdly. Later we go on to see that they're actually just isolationists that want to create a place where people can live without war. Their leader, the dude from Baki, even says that they only fight for self-defense. In a way, it feels like the story wants us to like them, as Seraphi actually comes to admire their cause, and we see that the people living with them are very happy. But they also murdered several people and acted like it was fun, like they were memeing while killing people. So I really can't sympathize with them personally. It felt like they showed their violent actions very deliberately and then just tried to brush them under the rug. Gundam typically treats death very seriously. Other than that, the comic has pretty good action, decent art, and it's apparently a pretty popular release in Japan too. If you're interested by its wacky adventures and mobile suits, it might be worth reading for you. But that's it for my thoughts on Red Giant though. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I appreciate likes, comments, subs, you know how it is. I know this was kind of a brief video. I just like to go over things fast, tell you what you really need to know, not go into extraneous detail because I feel like that detracts from the reading experience. In any case, guys, stay safe. God bless y'all. Peace.